The moment the antique grandfather clock in the hallway struck 12, the glass in Amelia's hand trembled so violently that the champagne inside splashed onto the polished oak floor, forming a miniature river of bubbles that rolled toward the doorway. She stood there, vested in ivory silk, her veil a crown of lace, watching the liquid cascade over the cracked photograph on the mantel, a picture of her and Jonah, their smiles frozen in a moment that now felt like a lie. She could have turned, could have reached out for the man who'd promised forever just hours earlier, could have begged the maid of honor to explain the whispers she'd heard in the hallway. But the world had already tilted, and the only direction left to go was forward, away. The wedding had been a perfect storm of pastel roses and soft piano chords, a tableau that would have made even the most cynical aunt weep. Amelia, a child of the coast, had dreamed of this day since she was 5, pressing her tiny hand against her mother's lace-trimmed apron and whispering, "I'll marry a man who can make the sea calm with a smile." Jonah Whittaker was that man, or so she believed. He arrived in a charcoal suit, his hair just a shade too dark for the sunrise, his eyes a calm blue that seemed to echo the Atlantic she'd grown up beside. Their first kiss, beneath a canopy of wisteria, felt like a promise sealed in the scent of lavender and sunlight. The maid of honor, Lila, was Amelia's childhood confidant, a girl who'd shared secrets in the back of school buses, who'd helped Amelia practice her vows in a cramped attic, who knew the exact cadence of Amelia's laughter. Lila's smile had always been a little too bright, her laughter a notch louder than necessary, but to Amelia, she was family. The ceremony was flawless. The vows were whispered, the rings exchanged, the kiss sealed. The reception was a riot of clinking glasses, a swirl of bodies on the dance floor, a night that seemed to stretch into forever. And then, as the champagne flowed and the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, Amelia slipped away to the bathroom for a momentary reprieve. She left Jonah's arm, trusting that his hand would find hers again when she returned. The hallway was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the grandfather clock ticking away the seconds. Amelia brushed past the marble columns, her mind replaying the vows she'd just spoken. For better, for worse, in sickness and in health. She barely noticed the soft thud of a footstep behind her. When she opened the bathroom door, the scent of sandalwood and fresh roses was overpowered by something metallic, an odd, bitter tang that made her stomach churn. She paused, hand on the cold marble, listening. The muffled giggle of 2 women drifted from the ballroom, a sound that should have been joyous but now prickled like a warning. Amelia's eyes landed on the hallway mirror and froze. In the polished surface, a scene unfolded that turned the world on its axis. She saw Jonah, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his shirt unfastened, his breath shallow against Lila's cheek. Lila's dress, the same ivory satin she'd helped design for the maid of honor's own dress, lay disheveled on the floor, her hair tangled, a strand of the same lace from Amelia's veil caught in her fingers. The 2 of them were on a plush settee near the bar, far enough from the prying eyes of guests, but close enough that the faint perfume of the roses couldn't mask a hint of something else, an intimacy that had no place in Amelia's wedding night. The clock's ticking grew louder in Amelia's ears. She could hear the soft rustle of the silk dresses, the breathy sighs, the muffled laughter, an echo of betrayal that reverberated in every corner of the hall. She felt the champagne bottle in her hand tremble as if it, too, sensed the collapse of her world. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rush forward, to plunge into the scene, to wrench the man she loved from Lila's grasp and demand explanations, as if they were a game of chess where she still held a queen. But the floor beneath her seemed to dissolve, and a cold certainty took hold. The night was already broken. Instead of stepping forward, Amelia turned on her heel. The soft swish of her gown brushed the marble, a sound that seemed louder than the music still playing in the reception. She walked past the open doors, her eyes fixed on the wall ahead, on the exit that glowed with the promise of rain. Her shoes clicked against the stone as she moved toward the grand doors that led out to the garden, the cool night air waiting like an old friend. The night sky was a bruised violet, a thin veil of clouds hiding the moon. She could smell the sea, salty, unfiltered, the scent of her childhood, calling her home. The garden was a labyrinth of hedges, fairy lights strung like constellations, and a fountain that sang a soft, melancholic tune. It was the same garden where Amelia and Jonah had first kissed under the summer stars, the place where she'd practiced walking the aisle in her mind, hand in hand with him. She walked to the edge where the garden met the cliffs that dropped into the churning Atlantic. The waves crashed against the rocks with a fierce rhythm, a reminder that some things cannot be tamed no matter how much we try to keep them in glass cases. Amelia stood there, breathing in the salty wind, feeling each breath pull away a little piece of the betrayal that clung to her heart. Her dress fluttered like a wounded bird, her veil caught in the wind, trailing behind her like a ghost of promises unkept. She thought of Lila. She thought of the shared childhood, the secrets whispered in the dark, the way Lila had always seemed to know exactly when Amelia needed a shoulder. And she thought of the night's cruel comedy, how the woman she'd entrusted with her most intimate moments had taken the man who was supposed to be her anchor. "Amelia," a voice called from behind, soft and trembling. She didn't turn. She didn't need to see the face of her husband, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands clenched in the pockets of his tuxedo, his shoulders slumped as though the weight of his sin was crushing him. "Please," Jonah whispered, the words barely carried by the wind. "It was a mistake. It's over. I love you." She raised a hand, a single motion that seemed to slice through the night. "Love isn't a word you throw around when you're drunk or scared, Jonah." Her voice was steady, a low thunder that seemed to rise from the same place as the crashing waves. "It's a promise, and you broke it in the very moment you took my hand, swore forever, and put a ring on my finger." She didn't look at him, didn't see Lila's face, whether she stood nearby, eyes brimming with unshed tears, remorse twisting her features. She let the sea wind take her veil, let the tide swallow the sand beneath her feet, let the night swallow her dreams. "Walk away," she said, the words as simple as the steps she was about to take. "Don't try to follow. Don't look back. The world you wanted is a house of cards now. I'll build mine elsewhere." There was no reply. The only sound was the crescendo of the ocean's roar and the distant clink of crystal glasses from the party still raging inside. It was as if the universe had pressed pause on the wedding she'd imagined and pressed play on the future she'd never planned. And then, with a final sigh that seemed to carry all the unsaid apologies, Amelia turned her back to the cliff, to Jonah, to Lila, to the life she had believed was hers. She walked away, her steps measured, her eyes never meeting theirs, her heart a slow, steady drum against the deafening silence of her own resolve. The night swallowed her silhouette, the garden lights flickering like dying fireflies as she slipped into the darkness. The next morning, the sun rose over the Atlantic like a golden promise, painting the water with strokes of amber and rose. The wedding party awoke to find the ceremony hall empty, the tables still set, the cake untouched, a single glass of champagne half-filled on the centerpiece. The clock on the mantel read 2:13 a.m., 2 hours after midnight, the time Amelia had left. Jonah's phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls, his voicemail filled with Amelia's voice, a calm, measured recording she'd left before exiting. "If you ever need closure, meet me at the pier at sunrise. Bring nothing but the truth." He stared at the message, the weight of his actions pressing down like the tide on the cliffs. He could have called Lila, could have tried to fabricate explanations, could have tried to erase the night's damage with a kiss, but all he could feel was the cold emptiness of a promise broken. Lila, sitting alone on a bench in the garden, clutching a crumpled napkin, sobbed into the wind. She whispered Amelia's name as if it were a prayer, as if she could summon her back with the sound of grief. She didn't go to the pier. She didn't have the courage to face the woman she'd betrayed. She stayed in the shadows, haunted by the echo of the wedding vows she'd helped write. Amelia never returned to Whitaker Manor. She drove north, along the winding coastal road, following the same sea that had cradled her childhood. She found a small lighthouse on a cliff, its beacon sweeping across the waves, a symbol of guidance and warning. She rented a room above the keeper's cottage and began to write journals, letters that never sent, stories about seas and storms and the kind of love that could survive even the harshest tides. When Jonah finally arrived at the pier at sunrise, he found a lone figure silhouetted against the glowing horizon, the lighthouse's beam cutting through the early mist. He stepped onto the wooden planks, his heart a frantic drum. As he approached, he saw Amelia standing there, her back to him, gazing out at the infinite ocean. She turned, but she didn't look at him. "Amelia," he called, his voice hoarse. She smiled, a small, bittersweet curve. "The sea never holds on to its storms forever," she said, the wind tossing her hair. "It lets them pass, then it's quiet again. I'm learning to be the tide, not the shore." She turned and walked back toward the lighthouse, her silhouette merging with the light. Jonah stood there, watching her disappear, feeling the weight of his own regret settle like a stone in his chest. He walked away, his steps slow, his head bowed, leaving the shore behind as the day broke fully over the water. The lighthouse's beam flickered, steady, unwavering. It cast its light across the sea, across the cliffs, across the hearts of those who had once stood in its glow. And somewhere out there, beyond the roar of the waves, Amelia found a new rhythm, one that didn't depend on vows spoken under a canopy of roses, but on the quiet certainty that she would never again let anyone else decide the direction of her heart. She walked away without looking back, not because she couldn't, but because she chose to trust the tide of her own soul. And the ocean, ever patient, listened.